moving on to the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And I tell you, we're going to go a little long on this one, but that's okay because it's been 2 weeks and we have a lot to talk about. So, in case you have been living under a rock and don't know about the Kyle Rittenhouse case, the bare bones about it is that this was a 17-year-old kid who went from where his mom lived in Illinois to where his dad lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin, while there were BLM riots happening. He had an AR-15 with him and was working with a group of people to defend private property. People started chasing him. He shot and killed 2 of them, one while they were reaching for the weapon, one while he was beating them over the head with a skateboard, and then injured a 3rd person who was raising a pistol to shoot him. That all came out clear as day during the trial. If you want to know more about it, like I said, there are 18,000 different places you can learn about it, 18,000 different opinions on it. You can make your own judgments about what happened or why it happened, because it's pretty obvious from the evidence that there was more than enough reasonable doubt to say he was acting in self-defense. So plenty has been said about this case, and I'm not here to go over the same things. I'm not here to talk about his guilt or innocence. It's been talked to death. What is interesting about this case is the outside pressure put on the jury. So I'm just going to say this out now. That jury was made of heroes, and let me explain. Our entire justice system, and Marcus, if you want to sit back and relax for a minute, I got a whole thing here. So, our entire justice system is based on the fact that you are innocent until proven guilty, and that to do that, a fair and unbiased jury is extremely important to preserving our court system. It's what they are based on, a judgment of the jury of your peers. You know, you can look up a supercut on YouTube of all the times different media outlets called him a white supremacist, a murderer, and all the other forms of blasphemous names and descriptions for the past year, assuming his guilt and doing their best to prejudice the public against Mr. Rittenhouse. How they found a group of 18 jurors, 12 of which actually brought down the final verdict that was supposedly not pre-prejudiced for or against Rittenhouse is beyond me. I mean, I don't know how they found 12 people living under a rock. But then an even harder feat must be accomplished. They must stay unprejudiced throughout the trial, only letting the facts as presented by the prosecution and defense inform their position. This is basic civics, as we learn. Now, I'm not sure. Sorry. Now I'm sure you're wondering why I'm talking about this. Sometimes juries can't escape the outside pressure and cave to the winds instead of the law. That didn't happen in the Rittenhouse case, but it very well could have. This did happen in a very famous trial. It comes from a fictional book, To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm sure everybody here read it when they were in 10th grade, like me. And this 100% does happen. So a quick primer on it, because I'm sure most of you haven't read it since the 10th grade. Tom Robinson, a black man, is put on trial for the rape of a young woman. The backdrop and why this is important is Jim Crow era Alabama. Now, as we go through this trial, also set back, so Jim Crow era, it was set back in 1935. So as we go through this trial, it becomes very obvious that Robinson did not do what he was accused of because he couldn't possibly have. The girl was beaten up on the right side of her face, indicating a left-handed attacker, and had marks around her neck consistent with 2 hands around the neck choking her. Now, why could Robinson not possibly be able to do this? Well, his left hand had been all but lost in a cotton gin accident, ripping the muscle and leaving it a useless husk, not even able to stay on the Bible as he tries to swear himself in. Now, why is this important to the Rittenhouse case and jury? It revolves around the burden of proof that the prosecution must carry, namely beyond a reasonable doubt. In the Robinson case, the reasonable doubt was as stated. You can't beat someone with your left hand if your left hand is useless. Now, in the Rittenhouse case, the prosecution's witnesses basically sprinkled in... The prosecution made the case for reasonable doubt themselves. The defense probably didn't even need to put up a defense. The prosecution, I don't know what they were thinking. I'm not a lawyer by any means. I'm not one to do legal analysis, but wow. In both cases, the burden of reasonable doubt was was met. So in the book, the conviction comes down after a few hours of deliberation, whereas after several days in the Rittenhouse trial, an acquittal can come down, which leads me to my final point. In Mockingbird, the jury was swayed by the outside pressure, namely Jim Crow South racism, whereas in Rittenhouse's case, the jury did not cave to the outside pressure, namely the threat of having their city burn again. So outside the courthouse, protesters shouted from, excuse me, and this is from the Daily Wire, "No justice, no peace, and if Kenosha doesn't get it, shut it down," among other slogans. And this commotion could reportedly been heard, could be heard from the inside at times. Do you have anything to say on this real quickly, Marcus? I want to, give you a chance to speak.
I think it was absurd. It took 3 days to come down with this verdict. Number one, I think it's important for the outside social media that it wouldn't have been nowhere near 3 days. I believe that without the outside influence,
you're probably right. So
yeah, but I think without the outside influence, I think the jury goes.
Well, I'm about to get right into that. So the juries could hear that from outside when they went home at night. Even though they were instructed not to pay attention to any outside news, they were still at home and in possession of technology that could access the internet. If you don't think they weren't on it at all 18 of them, no. And then there's the fact that they were followed home by a freelancer from MSNBC, who the judge thankfully threw out of the courtroom. But why would MSNBC follow these jurors home? I mean, they're just trying to do their civic duty here. The answer, probably so they can make their life miserable if what happened. But that's conjecture on my point. All of this comes from the side of the political spectrum that calls for and condones riots when they don't get their way. The side that was responsible for the riots that started this whole thing when someone with a arrest warrant against his ex-girlfriend came there with a knife, turned on the police officer as he was trying to get into a car with the kids, and the police shot him, as they should have. So in the book, there's a conversation that Atticus Fitch, the lawyer who represented Tom Robinson, said to his son after the trial, and it said, "You might like to know that there was one fellow who took considerable wearing down. In the beginning, he was raring for an outright acquittal. And then a little bit farther down, if we'd had two of that crowd, we'd have had a hung jury. This jury in To Kill a Mockingbird could have been heroes if they had just a little more courage. They could have stood up to the evil pressures that was Jim Crow racism, and it was evil. Now, it might have cost them everything in southern Alabama, but it would have been the right thing to do. And that is why, in the Rittenhouse trial, the fact that the jury put aside the threats of violence, the fact that the mainstream media was trying to follow them home, a sitting congresswoman falsely equating an acquittal to an endorsement of white supremacists shooting at her from behind a hill in Ferguson, which is a whole nother thing. They knew all of that, and they followed the facts to the correct conclusion, and they had the courage to render a just verdict, and that is why they are American heroes. Okay. Whew. Marcus, you got anything?
I completely agree, 100%, because when you got one of the guys saying, legit said on stand, yes, I went at Kyle Rittenhouse with the intent to kill him with a gun raised. He admitted to it. Legit said that was my intent, was to attack him. At that point, game over. Self-defense. He literally admitted.
Why was that guy not put on trial, by the way? I mean, he admitted under oath that he did things that are illegal. But, we're not ready for that.
No, the thing I hate, though, is that the media wants to talk about, Kyle Rittenhouse killed 3 people, yada, 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 but they fail to mention things such as how he was trying to help feed the community by putting out a dumpster fire rolling towards a gas station. So, I mean, they wanted to report on this and that, and the way people have reacted in the media, then those 3 days of deliberation, you got people on Twitter and Facebook talking about, oh, if Kyle Rittenhouse wins, this is our system's failing, yada yada yada, all that stuff. And the fact that they had all the outside pressure, and you know that they saw it. I know you're not supposed to look at that stuff, but whenever it's everywhere, there's no way to avoid it, especially in today's world. Because I'm sorry, but there's no way you're going to find
unless
a
you
group of people
sequester them. Unless you sequester them away from everything, you're not going to find it. All right, so that's what we had. That's basically the outside. Never heard story we wanted to put out on that. I think that the actual case is talked to death, but I do believe that those jury men and women are heroes for standing up to that pressure.